Hello, San Diego Comic Con. Welcome to Writing Psychologically Rich Characters. We've got a fantastic panel of writers who are going to tell us about their process and give you some tips on how to write a psychologically rich, diverse character for your manuscript. Let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. Let's start clockwise with Diane.
Hi, I'm Diane Dodson, call me Diane, and I'm a science fiction and fantasy author and science writer, and I am the author of the Questrison Saga, Heliopause, Ephemeris, Accretion, and the newly released Luminiferous. And I grew up in East Tennessee as one of the few nerds around, so I kind of made my own little astronomy club and built from there, ended up going into science, but not in space science. I have an ecology background, and sometimes I use that to kind of dabble in my stories and world building. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Diane. And Tracy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Deonn, author of Legendborn. Legendborn is my debut young adult contemporary fantasy novel. It's nominated for the Lodestar Locus Award for Young Adult Fiction and the Ignite Award this year. It's really exciting. And I would call it Southern Black Girl Magic meets King Arthur meets Secret Society meets intergenerational trauma. But believe it or not, it all works. I also wrote a story from the perspective of the Cave of Evil on Dagobah for the anniversary anthology of The Empire Strikes Back from a certain point of view. And I'm very happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, Tracy. Jon.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really happy to be here. So I am Jon McGoran. My most recent trilogy is the Spliced trilogy, which is my first young adult sci-fi trilogy. Set in the near future where genetic engineering technology has matured to the point where it's available in the street as a form of body modification. In a backlash, the people opposed to it passed a law that anyone whose DNA is not 100% human is no longer legally a person. So I've previously written science thrillers. I had a series, Drift, Dead Out, and Dust Up, with Tor Forge, and I've written a bunch of short stories, science fiction, some horror. When I'm not writing my books and short stories, I work as a developmental editor, and I co-host a podcast, the Liars Club podcast, which a couple of my fellow panelists have been on as guests, and I think before too long, the rest of you probably will be as well.
It is an honor and a pleasure to have you here, Jon. The one and only Deric Hughes. Come on down.
First off, I feel like John Travolta in that meme where he just like looking around. Like when you said manuscripts, I'm like, hold on, y'all writing some really, really hard stuff, like thousands and thousands of words. So I was like, I don't have a manuscript. I'm looking around. I don't have a single manuscript. I got maybe like notes on my iPhone. That's about it. So with that being said, what's up? I'm Deric. I write in television. And films, TV shows such as Flash, Arrow, and most recently CW's Legacies. And maybe at some point I'll write a manuscript and be like these esteemed my fellow colleagues here, because now I'm feeling really inadequate and I'm sweating. So thank you for that, Billy. Thank you.
Anytime I can make you uncomfortable, Deric, I'm always happy to do so. Alex, come on down.
There were hounds in the background, so I muted myself for a moment there. Hi, I'm Alex Simmons, and I'm also a writer. My most recent work is a short story in the Black Panther Tales of Wakanda anthology that was just released, thanks to the wonderful Jesse Holland and 17 other wonderful people. I'm also a writer for DC, for Archie Comics, for a number of independent projects, and also the creator of a series of adventure tales called Blackjack, which is about an African-American soldier of fortune in the 1930s. I'm also the co-creator of an initiative called the Kids Comic Con, and we've been in existence for 15 years, and even COVID didn't stop us because we were able to do 2 virtual cons in 2020 and in 2021. And I've also taught, and I teach screenwriting at the New York Film Academy, among a few other things. And that's all for now, because I want to make room for everybody else to speak. But thank you for having me here. I'm really, really honored to be here with everybody.
It's an honor to have you with us, Alex. Dr. Janina Scarlet, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Billy. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Janina Scarlet. I'm a clinical psychologist, author, and a full-time geek. And I specialize in incorporating fiction into mental health to help people recover from PTSD. My most recent book is a graphic novel called Dark Agents about a witch who struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Sounds incredibly helpful and an interesting read. And last but not least, the one, the only, Dennis K. Crosby.
I think that intro makes me seem like I'm more than I am, so I will take it. Thank you so much, Billy. I am Dennis Crosby. I am the author of Death's Legacy. It is my debut urban fantasy novel. It is a blend of, I would say, Jessica Jones and Clash of the Titans. I've got some good Greek mythology going on in there. Lots of magic, reapers, wraiths, just all kinds of crazy stuff happening. As I mentioned, it's my debut novel. The follow-up will be out in November of 2021. I have a short story also in the Castle of Horror anthology. It's called The Boneyard, and it is a horror version of Sanford and Son. Yes, you heard that right. I'm taking some 70s pop culture and turning it on its ear. So it is a blast. You should definitely check that out. There's some other great stories in there as well. But excited to be here. Being at a Comic-Con panel is on my bucket list, and I can now check that off. Although I have committed myself to a dozen panels, so I will be here hopefully for many, many years to come. But thanks for having me at this first one. Really appreciate it.
We're glad to have you check that off your list with us. And my name is Dr. Billy San Juan. I am a therapist, writer, raconteur, and moderator. So let's go ahead and throw the big question out to all of our panelists. What is a psychologically rich character? How do we define that? And how do you go about writing one? Dr. Scarlet.
So, to me, a psychologically rich character is one that is multidimensional, is one that has been through something, and most importantly, I think someone that the readers can really connect to. I find that a lot of people feel really alone in their day-to-day struggles, but when they read certain books, there might be a character that they really resonate with, that reminds them of something that happened to them, that reminds them that they're not alone. So to me, those are the richest psychological characters, ones that can really remind us of our daily struggles and also remind us that there's always hope. Exactly.
John.
Yeah, I just, in my mind, it's about kind of like flaws and quirks and idiosyncrasies and kind of whatever your idea of the norm is, whatever that is, whatever normal is, and if it is, because I don't really know for sure that's a thing that exists. But the further you diverge from that, I think it gives you the opportunity to explore things in a different way. So much of character is about point of view, and when you have characters who come at whatever's happening or whatever whatever the theme is or whatever the plot is, whatever, if they have these kind of interesting ways of coming at it, you're going to get an interesting interaction. You're going to get an interesting, they're not going to do the things that you might initially expect them to do. They'll do something more interesting. And if you can create these characters that have the kind of the depth to pull that off, if they have the kind of the texture, then it makes perfect sense that they're going to react in ways that aren't what is expected. And I think that a lot of times that's what makes fiction really exciting. Fantastic points.
Dennis, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think the most important part in any fiction is, as Janine said, it's making the reader be able to connect, or getting the reader to connect with the character. And, we hear all these stories about how there's only, one person says there's only really 7 true plots in the world. There's only 12, there's only 21, there's only 30. And that may or may not be true, but what is important in any story that you tell is the character, and getting that character correct, and being able to write someone that is realistic. You can have someone that has fantastic abilities and that can, fly, they can travel through time, they can run fast, but they still have bills to pay when they get home. They still have, these subtle pieces of reality that they have to deal with. And if you're able to take care of that part and really inject the angst that goes with that, you've got a character that people can relate to. And I think that makes it more, gives it a little bit more of realism. So it's just not completely fantastic.
Injecting angst is something I do every day. Diane.
When I think of a psychologically rich character, I think in terms of a spectrum, a rainbow in which you have a person, and it could be a hero or a villain, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day. If they don't go through the entire spectrum, they could be indigo one moment and, ultraviolet the next, and then golden. And in that regard, a psychologically rich character is more than a cardboard cutout. It's more than, Sally did this. Sally came from a background that inflicted pain on her at a young age or something like that. And so what spectrum on this rainbow did she go through? And if you plunge Sally into, say, a cafe, how does she react versus being at the edge of the solar system and there's attack on her space station, So you want to try to capture that whole arc of how she would react in different situations, and whether or not you like this character, you can at least relate to her because she's flung into different situations. You thought out, who is she in a normal situation? Who is she in a catastrophe?
Fantastic analysis of where to put your characters on those various spectrums. Thank you, Diane. Tracy.
When I think about this question, I think about characters that have a mission or a want, and my instinct is always to give them some degree of permeability to the world around them, or to seek out where that exists in another story that I haven't written. I love this idea that there's an external influence that the character can either reject, absorb, reinterpret. I'm always looking for that, I think, in my characters is, if you have a mission, let's say I want X at the beginning of the book, but then you put that character in the path of a lot of obstacles, or you put obstacles in a lot of that, in the path of the character, what are they doing with it? And even if your character is simply sort of resisting every obstacle the entire way and remaining obstinate in their goal, like that's an interesting dynamic to watch and observe. And it tells you a lot about who they are and how they deal with challenges. But I also really love it when an obstacle shows up that maybe they want to resist in order to maintain their mission, but it knocks them slightly off the path, or maybe they absorb it and their mission expands or contracts. And then that helps me understand what really is driving this character, both in like the front of their mind and then the back.
The main thing that drives me is chocolate and donuts. Alex, would you like to pitch in on here?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has said, absolutely on point points. And the only thing I would add to that is multidimensional character also helps us avoid stereotypes and one-dimensional characters. I mean, what a person looks like is one thing, but what they think, what they feel, where they came from, what their cultural background, their family, their relationships, all these elements create an individual who is going to be very different from everybody that's come before them or that will come, who they're bouncing off against. And especially when you're dealing with characters of color or women or people with, I think, was it John was saying the norm, whatever that is, when that person, that character is outside of that realm, it still allows the audience to find something that they recognize, something that they can connect to, something that they're curious about. And so they want to go on that journey with that character just to see what's going to happen next, villain or hero, heroine or victim. So I think that, the richer the character, the more material you have to work with.
Fantastic points. Just like in real life, our characters are very similar to us. I do want to ask a follow-up question on something that Dr. Scarlet had mentioned about the audience being able to connect to a psychologically rich, diverse character. How do you go about sculpting a character that people can connect to? Are you ever sure, or are you ever uncertain that someone may not be able to be connectable, if you will?
I think there's a lot of things you can do to make your characters more psychologically complex. But I just wanted to kind of throw in. I think that years ago there was kind of a knock on science fiction, that it was too much about science and not enough of the fiction, and the characters were a little two-dimensional, and maybe that may have been the case at some point. But I think that definitely is no longer the case. And I think that in a lot of ways, it's even more important in science fiction than other genres, that your characters are, that complexity makes them believable, makes them compelling, makes them engaging. And the more realistic and the more believable you can make them, the more easy it is going to be for your reader to accept all the crazy outlandish stuff that you're throwing at them apart from character. So, if you've got, whether it's fantasy or science fiction, whatever, all this outlandish stuff that you're throwing out there, that of course you've done all your research and made it believable in an intellectual way. But if you have believable, realistic characters, it's going to make it, the reader's going to engage with the characters, but they're also going to find it that much easier to suspend their disbelief in other areas.
It's funny, John, you should talk about science fiction and everything. I tend to find that whether you're dealing with any kind of fantastic world, so whether it's science fiction or cartoon dogs, talking dogs, or and in my case, one of my characters the storylines take place in the 1930s. It's again trying to identify the human elements, the traits and habits that we humans in some way have some sort of universal connection to. You're not going to get everybody, but you're going to get a certain portion of your audience. And I think again it goes back to the more genuine and authentic you can make that character, the more elements someone in the audience is going to pick up on, whether they're in the past, the present, or the future, or whether they're totally human and gorgeous, or a little robot who's left on a devastated Earth because the environment went crazy. So I think, again, we find these traits and we endow our characters with these particular traits and habits, and then we try and construct the most authentic, genuine, fascinating, and engaging story we can, and hope that the characters are as compelling as they can be.
Absolutely. And as far as humans being gorgeous, no one's as gorgeous as you, Alex. Dennis.
I have my background's a bit eclectic, right? So I spent 13 years in retail sales. I spent 7 years as a private investigator, and the last 13 years I've been in social service. So I have been inundated with people, just getting to understand people and kind of find out what makes them tick. And I think that has informed my writing a lot. And it's also caused me to look at the work of others and really see if they're getting those pieces right. Are they really capturing what it means for that person to be an addict? Are they really capturing what it means for that person to suffer from PTSD, or to suffer from schizophrenia, or some type of phobia? I think that if we're not certain about how to capture that right in a story or with that character, that it's incumbent upon us to find out more. The way to make that character more believable is to ask the experts, talk to counselors, psychiatrists, talk to people that have worked in that field. If folks are comfortable with it, talk to the people that have experienced those challenges and get a sense for what it's like to live as them, from day to day, to make sure that you are getting it right. Because the worst thing you can do is show any type of disrespect to a population through a character that you've created, especially when it's not intentional, and none of us want to do that. We're not trying to do that intentionally. We're trying to tell a good story. But the best way to do that is to be true to that character and true to whatever it is they're going to. So, do the research, reach out, talk to folks, and make sure that you're getting it right. You don't want someone saying something that they wouldn't normally say in the real world.
Fantastic points, especially in the realms of mental illness, disability, even racial issues, religious issues. We want to make sure that we avoid taboos, avoid misrepresentation. Thank you, Dennis. Diane.
Whenever I think of making a new character, I like to think, and I'll go back to the rainbow thing briefly, but I like to think of, what drives each of us and what would drive any person. And we all have a commonality, we all suffer. And even those of us who have no powers versus those who have superpowers or unique abilities, there is that common ground of, suffering that we go through and the sense of wanting to belong. Like you could look at Clark Kent versus Superman, and Clark is just sort of this bumbling office worker, but on the side, he's a superhero. And at the same time, he's a fish out of water and he wants to fit in. He wants to help, but he wants to fit in. So he does suffer, even though he has tremendous power. And for those characters that don't have superpowers and they're flung in extraordinary situations, it comes down to it at the end of the day, how can I get out of something that makes me suffer, or how can I help stop suffering in someone else? And that sort of drives and makes heroes versus villains. The heroes want to stop suffering and the villains want to increase it.
Those are fantastic points, especially about Superman. And we all want to know, why did they say Martha? Deric.
Did we really? Oh, good Lord. If I bring up PTSD, speaking of which. So in television, yeah, I think it's what we have is the luxury of being able to flesh out characters, as we call the emojos, from episode to episode. Like, what's the emotional journey of each character? And as we figure out the plot, the story, but again, it starts at the root of like, what is the emotional journey of this character and what they're going through this episode? Where are they at the beginning of the episode and where they end up at the end of the episode? But not only at the end of the episode, since again, a lot of shows are serialized, then going over what's going to carry over into the next episode, so forth and so on, and you plant the seeds and go on. And I think the thing is like, especially in network television, as you are writing, you're also then, you're shooting the episodes and then they're airing. And so you get to have the audience's reactions, the audience's expectations of what actually is working, what isn't working. You can calibrate. It's not necessarily say that you're going to make every change and every whim of somebody complaining about a character, saying like, why is this character saying Martha 7 times every episode? Because we like it. But it is this idea that, you can say like, okay, that seems to resonate with people. That doesn't seem to resonate. Oh, that is definitely a red flag. We should not, we shouldn't think about that. And in that time also, that is the time of like where you can reach out and talk to experts and consultants, the people that are experts in these fields. But sometimes it does get messy, because a lot of times what happens behind the scenes, it doesn't necessarily translate onto what happens in the screen. And there's stumbling blocks. It is just sort of like, I think, like, as people have pointed out, it is that you want to make your characters as real and as believable as possible within the as sort of as much as possible. There will be exceptions to it. And I think in this day and age, it's even more so important, because there was a sort of a pass of letting people get away with things and saying like, well, that's just television, that's just Hollywood. And I think that we're past that point now, where it's like, no, it's like it matters to get it right on the first try, rather than having it being called out and saying, oh, whoops, my bad, we'll do better next time around. It's like, I think because it's not like because we don't operate in a vacuum. We operate in the real world, we see what's happening, and I think it's a responsibility as writers and creators to really sort of like take that responsibility and apply it in your storytelling and in every facet of it.
An ethic and moral I hope we all share. Thank you, Deric. Tracy.
I feel like I was thinking about it. I feel like my answer is going to be very craft level, because I feel like it's not a trick, because I think it's actually just naturally how I write. But I think one of the things that I think is really, that I keep coming back to, is really intimate first person POV helps me make a character really relatable. Even like I said, I wrote the perspective of the cave evil on Dagobah. So this is a cave. It's not a person, it's a landform of stone, and it's immortal. And I remember thinking, well, what's going to make it interesting is the choices that we get to see and understand from really close first person. So it is a little bit of a trick. It's craft choice, but I feel like when you get that really intimate view of someone's decision-making process, and I say that because I think decisions help us understand a character so deeply. The decisions they make, a stimuli, their response to it, and then what they decide to do in terms of taking action off of that just teaches you so much about someone. So that's my sort of craft level fiction answer. But I was thinking about what Alex said. I assume Alex was talking about Wall-E. I hope there's no other depressing robot living on on a dystopic Earth. But with Wall-E, you know, Pixar is so great because you don't have the dialogue, so you don't have the benefit of words guiding you through so much of that sequence when we meet Wall-E, but we see his decision making and we understand what the stakes are for him and how he responds to even very small things. You know, he's out by himself and you can sort of see that he's like navigating the terrain. And I don't know, that was just another example of a character who's not human, but we're relating to Wall-E because of what he faces. And we're getting to see very, very close attention to this small little robot's decisions. He's not out saving the world. He's not doing big stroke stuff. He's just trying to figure out how to navigate around some trash. But like that somehow helps us understand and feel close to him because we're like, oh yeah, how is he going to do that? So I think my answer is first person is a good trick, but also just really slowing down and seeing really small, intimate decisions. I think that always helps me relate to a character.
A great insight into Tracy's process. Thank you, Tracy. Dr. Scarlet.
Tracy, can I just say I can't wait to read the perspective from Dagobah. That just sounds amazing. And so I'm trying not to repeat too many things of what the amazing individuals on this panel have already said. But as a psychologist that works with people with severe trauma, what I've noticed is that a lot of times individuals feel so alone, and it's in a particular book or a movie or a TV show that they might find a character that they relate to so much. And sometimes it's a leading character and sometimes it's not. And so, Deric, I don't think I ever told you this before, but I have a number of clients that really survived like by the edge of their seat essentially because of Arrow. Just because of the amazing character development on the show, these individuals were able to keep going through some of the most challenging times of their lives. And so I think it's about not only focusing on the leading character, but also on the side characters, because a lot of times it might be something that's happening to them that the reader or the viewer might really relate to, and maybe putting something that's real, either from our experience or someone else's experience, like being late to school. I mean, everyone knows that anxiety, right? Being rejected by your crush. I think a majority of us know that heartbreak. And also, I think I love what Dennis was saying in terms of observing people and even interviewing people to make sure that we get it right. So maybe interviewing someone that has been through something like that, interviewing a representative of that particular culture or background. I know Dr. San Juan and I both have consulted with writers regarding mental health in terms of ensuring that writers are able to talk about mental health in an accurate kind of way. And so if any of you out there are writing, I think just the more people you can observe, the more people you can talk to, and the more you can put little tidbits of your own experiences into different characters, the more I think it brings them to life.
Fantastic points. And it actually brings up a question I'd like to pose to the panelists. We've been talking about the protagonist mainly, a psychologically diverse protagonist. What is the process for creating a psychologically diverse side character or antagonist that not only has their own story arc, but how do you tie it in to the protagonist's main journey? Let's go with Dr. Scarlet. You rose your hand first.
This might sound a little bit cheesy, but I like to kind of pretend that I'm having coffee with pretty much any characters that are on for more than a page or two. And so I'll spend maybe an hour with them just thinking about what we might talk about, what might be their mannerisms. Will they be on time? Will they be early or will they be late? Will their hands be shaking from anxiety, for example? What will they order? And what will they choose to reveal to me versus what I already know, but they might not be willing to talk about. And so in having this kind of imaginary coffee with each of my characters separately, I think for me anyway, in my writing process allows me to get to know them kind of from maybe almost like from the side, and also to see how I want the readers to see them versus how I, as the writer, get to know them.
That's fantastic. Diane.
In the Questrison Saga, I have a character named Ariad, who is one of the main characters, but not the central character. And he is in disguise, not to spoil it too much, for a brief period of time. And then in the second book, Ephemeris, you learn his backstory. And in the past, he was a real jerk, an arrogant and lonely person, literally in a high tower on an asteroid floating above a planet in his castle, a mage governor. So he has sort of, quote, magic abilities. But what drives Ariad at first is his loneliness, because he is ageless and he's spending eons with no one around until he meets Galadea, who is also ageless, but she's just beginning her journey. So he instantly thinks, oh, thank God, I have someone that maybe I could spend time with, but that it makes him kind of a creep though, because, she's just starting out and he's clinging to her but his loneliness is so powerful that just knowing that he could connect with her even briefly brings him out of his shell. And he's a complex character that elicits a lot of emotions, I've noticed from readers, and they find him relatable because he's not this cut and dried person. He's not exactly a hero, and he's not exactly an anti-hero. So he's just a rich person because he has got an arc. He started out not caring about anything. And then when he meets Galadea, he suddenly believes that there's more to life than just sitting in that high tower. And he's then brought out into the universe to try to help save it. So I liked working with him because I actually dreamed him when I was in 1987, when I was a kid. And at the time, he was sort of like a space rock god, but he went on to be probably one of my most favorite characters. And he seems to be a lot of people simply because you don't know what he's going to do next. He's got a lot of power, but his weakness is just that loneliness. I think we can all relate to that once in a while.
Especially anyone who's ever been to high school. Alex.
I love your comments. I would say that, I tend to approach all of my characters and stories on almost the same level, whether they're the lead character or a minor supporting character, is how do they fit into this world? What's going on in the story? What's the cause and effect? What's the conflict? And what kind of characters will bounce off of each other or help shine a light on another aspect of the story? So I always try and do some background building on them. I have what's called a character bio that I put together, and I answer a number of questions about this character's background, attitudes, relationships, and things like that, so that I have a stronger, clearer picture of them whenever they interact with other characters. And I'll just give us a quick example. In my storylines with Blackjack, he's the lead character there, but he has a sister. She's a year older than him, and she doesn't go on these adventures with him. But in a number of the stories, he would get a letter from her, or there'd be a narration portion where he's dealing with her or thinking about her. And this went on for a number of years. She would make these little cameo appearances in certain stories, so that she was always there. And I had her, I'm going to try and round this off. I'd had them come back to the United States from where they were in Europe, another story, when they were about 20. And she goes to live in the Southwest. And this is a Black woman in 1930s. She goes to live in the South while he's going to stay in New York and then globetrot on his adventures. And I couldn't figure out, why the dickens am I having this Black woman who's actually traveled around the world a little bit? Why is she going to go live in the South in one of the more racist times in this country's history? Why am I having it? And I couldn't figure out why. It just was. She said, that's where I'm going in my head. So I did. For a number of years, that's where her little stories and things were coming from. 2019, I go to write a series of short stories about her that I'd been thinking about for a while. And I said, yes, I'm going to put down some time. I'm going to write about her. And in writing the second story, it suddenly erupted. And I suddenly knew exactly why she was there. And it made perfect sense. And it all tied into who she was and what her life had been like. But I hadn't seen it as clearly until that moment. But again, looking at all the bits and pieces that I knew about her, yes, of course. So I think, again, a lot of the times, whether it's a small supporting character or walk-on, the character has no lines or whatever, if you know why that character is there, if you know something about that character, if they have a life, before the scene starts and then you have know where they're going when it ends, then while they are there, they are important. And subsequently, you treat them that way.
Fantastic advice, Alex. Thank you. Dennis.
Yeah, I have to echo a lot of what Alex just said. You know, with every character has some type of motivation, whether they are, you know, the protagonist, antagonist, or secondary characters. I've had, you know, I talked a little bit about my previous positions, and with at least the last two jobs that I've had, investigations and social service, I've had to work on interviewing people, interviewing them to understand. Either it's interviewing to get to the truth, or it's interviewing to get to the truth so that I can understand how to help them. And I have taken that, and actually I do that with my characters. Much like Janina will take, you know, her characters to coffee, I will sit down and do an evaluation of my protagonist, my antagonist, and depending on how deep those secondary characters are in the story, I'll do the same with them. I will look at what their backstory is, what drives them, and what drives them to stick with a protagonist. You know, why are they hanging out with them? Why are they following, you know, whatever their journey might be? I have, I think, the most fun recently, at least, with the antagonists, because, you know, when you look at these villains, you can't think of them just as inherently bad or just the polar opposite of your protagonist. They have a journey themselves. It's not a hero's journey. In their mind it is, though. And because it is a hero's journey in their mind, you have to understand why. You have to keep asking the questions until you get to the point of understanding what was the catalyst for them wanting to do the things that they're doing. And with that, how far are they willing to go? Oftentimes the antagonist will go further than the protagonist will, and part of that hero's journey for the protagonist is going, you know, almost as far as their opposite will, without going over the edge, where the antagonist will probably go over the edge. Or will they? You know, how far are they willing to go and pull back to try to maybe save that last bit of their humanity? And you're not going to know what that is until you really dig deep. And that's what I find so refreshing about these interviews. And, you know, yeah, it's me talking to a make-believe character, but it is me talking to a make-believe character that wants very desperately to tell their story. And it's not unlike anything that I do in my day-to-day job. So that, I think, adds to that realism. That's going to add to the reader wanting to dive more into the story, even if the plot seems like, you know, it's something that they saw in a movie 6 years ago. Yeah, maybe they did, but they didn't see it with these characters and with these problems. So digging in deep and finding out the true underlying catalyst for what drives them, I think, is just crucial.
Very, very helpful insights. Thank you, Dennis. Jon.
Getting back to something that Alex said about creating the bios for the characters, and I think that can be hugely helpful. And I think it's important, though, to keep in mind that just, you know, everybody has depths that you can't perceive. You know, the people that you know and love and you see every day in your life, there's so much about them that you don't know because you're not inside them. You know, you're just never going to know them. And I think the same thing can be true and should be true with the characters, whether the protagonist, antagonist, secondary, whatever. I think it's really helpful if you can kind of have an elaborate bio in mind. You don't have to put it all on the page. You know, most of it is probably not going to end up on the page. It's like an iceberg, 15% of it is above the surface. But it helps you as the writer kind of keep your characters internally consistent. Like if you know them well, if you know a lot about them, that's going to inform how they react. And if those same set of facts or the same set of qualities is you know, in your notes or in the back of your mind, then they are going to act and react and respond as if they're motivated in a way that's internally consistent, so that it you know, the reader might not know exactly, you know, the 5 pages or 5 paragraphs or however much you write about them in your bio, but you have that template, and that's going to help keep you internally consistent. And I also want to say that just I do think that character is the most important thing in fiction. I hate it when people say character is everything, because nothing is everything. But I do agree that character is the most important thing. That it's not the first thing for me. So for me, I start out with a premise, and then I come up with a plot, or ideas of a plot, and then I try to figure out in broad strokes who are the people who would populate this plot, and then I can start to draw them with greater and greater depth and give them context and kind of get to know them myself and figure out how much of it's going to end up on the page. And I think that that can take characters in unexpected directions. If you have you need them to fit this weird little niche in your plot, well, you have to think about what would make a character do that, what would give them the motivation to do that, and then kind of reverse engineer it. That's just one way to go.
Excellent words on how to expand on those characters and give them much more rich, fulfilling presentations. Thank you, Jon. Tracy.
I trying to remember where I heard this first, but I've heard several people say that side characters or secondary characters all think they're the main character in the story, and that if you can sort of remember that they're the main character in their story, then that will help sort of keep that momentum on the sidelines. But which is a good thing to remember. But I have this image in my mind of what that actually means and what it looks like when it's not happening. So if you go to Disney World or Disneyland, the animatronics, and sometimes it seems like they don't move until you show up. like that's the side character that can seem two-dimensional and not helpful, because they're motion activated. Like you have to show up, and then all of a sudden they wake up and they start moving, right? What you want is more of like that sense from theater, which is that everyone on the stage has business. Like everyone has something to do. They're in motion. They woke up with stuff to do. They had a to-do list just like the main character did. And so we are perhaps, seeing them through the main character's eyes, or the protagonist is interacting with them, but they're halfway through their to-do list for the day. And their to-do list is not react to main character 24/7. It's doing what they need to do, what's prioritizing them. So I try and think of my side characters as always having business, always being in motion. I don't want the motion activated animatronic feeling. Although I will say in the first few drafts of any of my work, they are totally the animatronic. They're two-dimensional. They just stand there, and then they come to life when my main character enters the room. And it takes a while for me to get them into that, for me to know them and really understand, oh no, they're in the middle of, sorting their paperwork, or they're studying, or they're on the way to, the shipyard. They're not just standing still. They're not just waiting for this character to show up. But sometimes it does take a while. So if that imagery is helpful for anybody else, please take it.
Thank you for that metaphor, Tracy. Alex, would you like to add in? Alex, you're on mute.
I didn't hear the name. I just wanted to just quickly add in. I was thinking of a movie called Pitch Black with Vin Diesel. And I think the very fascinating thing about that character is the baddest, most evil, most despicable, most dangerous creature in the universe is the hero. And it's not until he goes up against these things that he's quote unquote the heroic figure, or the savior, or the possible savior. And the thing that's fascinating about that character development is you don't know what he's going to do, because he's not working by heroic rules. And so that made that story far more interesting to me. He's really about himself. And if he does the right thing, it seems to be as long as it serves him. So you're never sure what he's actually going to do in terms of the other characters in the story. And I think that's also fascinating, and a different way of spinning the lens when you're looking at storytelling is finding out what can shift a character's position in a story to make him, her, or it something that they theoretically would not normally ever be considered as.
Absolutely. And Deric, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, just real quick, piggyback on what everybody else is saying. I think and this was something that Tracy pointed out, is that your characters have to exist on the page and off the page, meaning that it's like when they're not on the page, they should still exist. Either it would be in your mind, either in the reader's mind, the viewer's mind, whatever. And when they come back, they are fully actualized characters, not just somebody that is waiting, like in the Truman Show, for Truman to walk by and then start speaking their parts, right? And I think that's it. And then, you know, to your point about the whole thing about the birth of the anti-hero, it's like Pitch Black is a very good example of that, as is Tony Soprano and Walter White. It's like these people that are despicable characters, but yet somehow you find yourself rooting for them because in their minds they believe they are the hero. In their minds that they believe that and that is the makes the most interesting villains are the ones that don't believe that they're villains. Right? It's like where villains fall short in television, film, or any medium is that when villains are just villains, when they're just outright stock mustache twirling, this stereotypical villains, that becomes very boring very quickly. Whereas a villain that believes that he has a POV, you show that the villain has a POV and a reason that makes you take pause and say like, maybe no, they're still awful, but I can see their point, but they're still very awful. That's the fun discovery of and just in general of like side characters. This just happened to me the other day. I was working on something, and because we had already fleshed out the character, there was a moment that even surprised me, and I was like, oh. Yeah, that makes sense. And it wouldn't have happened had that character not been fleshed out if it was just a stock type of character. So that's, that in itself is sort of rewarding. And as a viewer is rewarding because sometimes the most, like the most sort of inconsequential character that comes on screen, but because someone puts some thought into it, becomes a fan favorite. And somebody sees, as Janina says, that somebody sees themselves in that person because it took time to basically put life into that character and not just to be the satellite support service of the main character.
Thank you, Deric, for those helpful insights. Diane.
I wanted to jump in on the villain situation and how to make that relatable. And I think that one really great way to create a villain is to take away the agency, and not just for the villains, but for everybody. If you take a person's agency away, then they're left with a decision of like, how am I going to respond to this situation? And in my story is Officer Derry, who works for MindSend, is like, basically a mind cop. And he has his agency completely taken away and everything else with it when they have to make a decision to save everybody on the station or die. And he's not a part of that decision making. He's just trying to do his daily job. And after the decision is made and he's in this new environment and his job is no longer relevant and he's a nobody. So what does he do? He's like, this is not okay with me. I had a job. I liked it. You took me away. I can't even get home. So, then he becomes radicalized and decides, I'm out of here. And then once he makes that decision, the enemy's waiting for him and converts him completely. It finishes his radicalization because they know that any power he had was taken away by powerful people who think they're the heroes, but to him, they're the villains. And so he's like, no, I have power now, and this is what I'm going to do to you.
I've got the power. Thank you, Diane. So we have about 10 minutes left, not counting a few minutes at the end, to share where we can find you on social media and upcoming projects. So one last quick fire hot seat question for y'all. When you're doing your research for your psychologically rich characters, has there ever been a moment that shocked you, surprised you, or educated you about something you didn't know? Alex?
Yeah, very quickly, because I know I have had this story to do with blackjack for years. It involved Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics. And for years, I couldn't write that story. I'm writing all kinds of stories around it, couldn't write that story, wasn't sure why, just couldn't happen. Last year, during that time, I was privy to a webinar at Morehouse College, where I found out some information about the 1936 Olympics, and that being that all these years, all of my life, I'd heard about Jesse Owens and whether a black man who was a part of the Olympic team in 36. Then suddenly, last year, I find out there were 16 other blacks on the Olympic team, including 2 women. And I came through the 60s. I came through, a number of years of doing research on Black history and everything. Never, ever heard about the other 16. So that shocked the bejeebers out of me. Notice how I guarded my language there. And it then made me feel like, okay, that's why you couldn't write the story before. because you would have been wrong. So now I feel like I'm motivated to go at it because I have more information. So that goes back to what we were talking about, doing our research. I just got to do better.
That is something I didn't know either. Thank you for sharing that, Alex. Dr. Scarlet.
So in working on Dark Agents, it's a graphic novel about a witch who has PTSD and goes to the underworld to work for Hades as almost like a spy in the supernatural world. And in kind of building on Greek mythology, I've always been fascinated with Hera because she's usually perceived as, you know, this like really jealous and villainous kind of a character. And as I started writing her, I wanted to see her as, you know, this powerful, independent woman. And so in this particular graphic novel, she's left Zeus and she has a career. And I was thinking, what kind of a career would Hera have? And as a goddess of marriage, it just made sense she'd be a marriage therapist. And I was wondering, like, what would make her want to go for this career and leave Zeus? And I really struggled with it for a while until she told me. And so essentially, her story was that because Zeus was, you know, not a very good partner, and tricked her into marrying him and sexually assaulted her and was a cheating, lying, not a very good guy. She's had enough of it, and she realized that even the goddess of marriage deserves better, and that marriage does not mean being in an abusive relationship. And that's what she now wants to help people understand, is that being a goddess of marriage, or that marriage does not entail having to put up with abuse.
A paragon of marital fidelity, Zeus is not. Diane.
So in the past year, on a personal level, my father passed away suddenly and precipitated a cross-country move on my part during the pandemic. And I was in the middle of writing the final book of the Questrison Saga, which deals with family legacies and things like that. The whole series deals with family. And having lost my greatest supporter, you know, and not really, I just came completely, you know, unspooled in a lot of ways. It's a tremendous shock. And so, but at the same time, I was writing characters who were also going through grief. And when I went and I got some books about grief, you know, and losing a parent and things like that. And what I found was really interesting, and it helped me heal to write this. And in fact, if you put all my books together, the first letters of them all spell out heal. And that was intentional, but it ended up helping me a lot with Dad. Is that, you know, a lot of people say you go through these stages of grief. It's not necessarily that. It is a journey, and it's more of a roller coaster ride that you go up and down and around. And that really helped me write a couple of characters who both lost someone, like a parent figure, or who themselves were dying and realizing that what they had lost and could never get back. So, you know, it really framed how to write these characters and how to really channel my own emotions in a way that I had already done the research, you know, to see how different people process grief. And I had read testimonials of different people going through, like Death of a Parent, I think was one of the books. And it goes through different people's perspectives of what they went through, and that feeling of longing and loss or anger or all these different emotions that you go through. They don't have to be stages. Some people do go through the stages, but, you know, I just found that it's a different kind of spectrum. And, you know, at the end of the day, I just felt like if I hadn't done the research, I wouldn't have been able to really imbue those characters with loss.
Diane, thank you for sharing that with us. It was heartfelt, and it was an honor for all of us here in the audience to hear that part of the process for you. And on that note, we should start wrapping things up. So we'll go around in the order that we did before. If you would let us know your social media, where can people find you? What are some upcoming projects or appearances you have on the slates? And let's start with Diane.
You can find me at jdianedotson.com, and that's with 2 N's, but I think the misspelling also gets you there. And my social media handles tend to be at Diane Dodson, and on Facebook it's at Diane Dodson Writer. So I'm active on Twitter. I'm always on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook is sort of tertiary. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me everywhere. I'm even on TikTok, sort of dabbling in, you know, that's more for my Gen Z kids than me, but I'm still having fun. And I have tomorrow night, I have a special event that will be recorded and you guys can view it eventually, as I have in conversation with Jonathan Mayberry about Luminiferous, my fourth and latest book. I also have upcoming appearances. I will be at LA Comic-Con in early December. I will be part of the LA Story Expo. I have a panel called Clash of the Titans of Past and Future, talking about mythology and science fiction, and that happens in late September. So yeah, look me up online, join my newsletter, and thank you, and Ad Astra.
And Diane is a fantastic follow. Tracy.
I am found everywhere at Tracy Deonn, TracyDeonn. That's on Instagram and Twitter. TracyDeonn.com is my website. I'm kind of okay at updating Instagram and Twitter with events, so I wish I was a little bit more consistent, but it's always exciting when I do pop up and remember to say when I'm going to be somewhere. But I can tell you that next Thursday, this would be well, actually not next Thursday, June 10th, I'll just say, I have an appearance with Metaverse and BookCon. That's science fiction fantasy powerhouses panel with 4 big YA names. Sometimes I'm not sure why I'm there, but I am, and it's with Cassandra Clare and Veronica Roth and Victoria Aveyard, and we got to talk about writing and process. So that's coming up and it's going to be really fun to watch. I'm working on Legendborn 2 right now. Legendborn is a trilogy. So I'm working on the sequel and dealing with lots of consequences from the end of the first book. If you know, you know. And then I've got a couple of anthology appearances coming out and reworking, reimagining The Nightingale by Hans Christian Andersen in a fairy tale anthology that's coming out next year. And then I'm writing a new story around a fictional Black girl dealing with magic that we have seen before but haven't, which is sort of my brand. And that'll be in Cool Awkward Black, which is an anthology coming out by Karen Strong in 2023.
Fantastic things coming up from Tracy Dion. Jon, where can we find you?
So Jon McGoran, you know, no space, no H in John, but Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, it's all Jon McGoran. And my website is jonmcgoran.com. And if you go to my website, if you click on Splice Yourself, you can upload a picture of yourself, choose what animal you would like to be spliced with, and see how you'd look, you know, maybe 5% polar bear or 25% house cat or whatever. Is it silly? Yes, it is very silly, but it's a hoot. It's actually really cool. I co-host the Liars Club podcast, like I said, which is available, you know, everywhere podcasts are found. Next month, I think on June 10th, Spiked, the 3rd book in the Spliced trilogy, comes out in paperback. So all 3 will be out in paperback. We did just sell translation rights, Chinese rights, which I'm very excited about. We'll be interested to see how that pans out. And we've been working on a TV pitch. So I've been working with a producer and another screenwriter, and we're trying to get that up and running. Kind of got a little curveball when Sweet Tooth came out, so we'll have to see how that goes, because there's a little bit of overlap there. But yeah, that's me.
Be sure to visit the website and splice yourself on that website. Thank you, Jon.
And if you send me the picture, I'll throw it up in the gallery.
There you go, an SDCC exclusive for you. Deric, where can we find you?
You can find me at DBlackNees on Twitter and Instagram. And then as far as projects, my writing partner, Ben Rabb, and I, we're working on, what's that? No? Sorry, my lawyer said I can't say. But we are working on some other things that's coming up, including on the Legacy season finale. What's that? No, I can't say that. You know what? I don't care. I'm gonna say it. Whatever. What you gonna do?
Alex.
Okay. All right. So my website is simmonshereandnow.com, and I'm Simmons Alexander on Instagram, as well as Blackjack Adventures on Instagram. I'm working on a couple of Blackjack stories that'll be coming out towards the end of the summer. I also have a podcast that I do with my co-writer and friend, Chris Ryan. It's called Tell the Damn Story. And actually on July 18th, we're coming up on our 200th episode. So please check that out. I'll be doing a couple of panels, which I'm not supposed to talk about, but luckily my lawyer's not over here saying anything. But I can't mention them just yet, just like I can't mention something that we all are aware of right now. And I think the only other thing I would say is it's been a pleasure to be here with you guys, and I look forward to talking with you and hanging out with you in many other places.
Alex, it's an honor and a pleasure to be in the presence of comic royalty. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Ella.
Dr. Scarlet.
Hi, everyone. You can find me just about on any social media if you look for Janina Scarlet. My website is superhero-therapy.com. And my partner and I also have a podcast called Harry Potter Therapy, where we're looking at the psychology of each chapter of the Harry Potter series.
Be sure to check that out. Dennis, where can we find you?
You can check me out at my website, which is DennisKCrosby.com. I have to make sure, please put the K in there, otherwise you'll end up with some other Dennis Crosbys that you don't want to talk about. I am pretty active on Instagram. I'm at Dennis K. Crosby on Instagram, Twitter, pretty much everywhere else. I've got my next book coming out this fall. It's called Death's Debt. It is a follow-up to Death's Legacy. I've got the short story, The Boneyard, the horror take on Sanford and Son, which is it's in the Castle of Horror Anthology, Volume 5, subtitled Thinly Veiled, the 70s. And then this fall, I will be at the Fox Cities Book Festival. I'll be one of the featured authors for that festival for that weekend. So looking forward to some good things happening this 2021. And thank you again for the invitation to be here. Loved it. Happy to join in with these great writers. And looking forward to having another chance to do this again.
Thank you, Dennis. And for our audience members, 2 quick notes. If you want to check out Diane's website, it's JDIANNEDOTSON.com. And if you want to check out Alex's latest works, you can find him on either www.Simmons Here and Now, that's SIMMONS, HEREANDNOW.com, or check out the Blackjack Adventures at www.blackjackadventures.com. It's been an honor to be the moderator here. You can find me on Twitter at Billy_Sense, that's BILLI_SENSE. Big shout out to Dustin behind the scenes for helping us run this, and a big shout out to San Diego Comic-Con. Thank you for coming. Be sure to like and subscribe.